Roll call, please.
Trustee Humper. Trustee Lawrence.
Here.
Trustee O'Sullivan.
Here.
Trustee Rayberg.
Here.
Trustee Frost.
Here.
Trustee Vela. President Skillman.
Here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for our invocation by Pastor Tom.
Dear God, once again we unite our hearts in giving thanks to you for all that you're doing and accomplishing through this wonderful board, through our village officials. We thank you, and we give credit where credit is due. We thank you, God. Lord, we ask you for wisdom that's equal to the tasks ahead, all that you're doing. We see that the footprint of Carpentersville is emerging and changing for the positive, even as is evidenced by those around us who have verbally taken notice. We thank you, Father, and we acknowledge you in all of that. This is your accomplishment. And in all that you're doing, we also acknowledge the tragedies in our midst that require more help from a compassionate and understanding God. For our first responders, those who take the lead for us, the police, the firefighters, those who dispatch, who receive and assimilate and communicate accurate information, that those on the front lines would, through all of that, hear your voice and make the right decisions when humanly it would be impossible. But we know that with you all things are possible. And we ask for these things, for your help, for your guidance, for your strength, for your wisdom, for instant understanding, because you have invited us to ask that we might receive. This for the good of our village and the people of our communities whom you love and hold so dear to yourself, as we stand together. In your mighty name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Now go back to your meeting. I might stop by. Where are you at? Okay, thank you. Pastor Phil?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, Kelly, any proclamations tonight?
None.
Appointments, confirmations?
None of those either.
Public comment?
We have none tonight.
All right, so consent agenda. All items listed on the consent agenda will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussions on these items unless the trustee so requests, in which the event the item will be removed from the general order of business and considered in its normal sequence on the agenda.
I'll motion to remove item D from the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by trustee Rayberg, a second by trustee O'Sullivan.
So we don't even need the motion. A trustee can just yank it.
You could yank it?
Unilaterally, yep.
Perfect. So we yank that until next meeting. Hopefully we'll get that done.
I'm sorry. Now it's removed. We would take action on it after the rest of the consent agenda.
Okay.
So there will still be a motion following that, but just removing it has been
Oh, we're
done at this
removing it.
point.
That's
Right, so
right.
it's been removed at this point, but.
I'll motion to approve the consent agenda minus item D.
I'll second.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by trustee Rayberg, a second by trustee Diane Lawrence. And roll call, please.
Trustee Lawrence.
Yes.
Trustee O'Sullivan.
Yes.
Trustee Rayberg.
Yes.
Trustee Frost.
Yes.
President Skillman.
Yes, motion carries. All right, next item on the agenda, reports of manager and staff, Wakefield Storm. Ajay, please step up.
Thank you, sir. Welcome.
Gave the right direction.
Yeah, the picture.
Thank you.
The picture's pretty on point.
So good evening, President Skillman and the Board of Trustees. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today to present to you today our findings and possibly some alternatives we have looked at for your consideration for the Wakefield and Bristol flooding. So a little bit about what we will cover today is just kind of go over briefly the study and the scope that was laid out for us, and then we'll discuss a little bit about our methodology as to how we went about doing the study on this, present some findings on the existing conditions and just, some causes why it floods, and some of the alternates we have looked at for you tonight, and then just present the different costs for the different alternates, and then discuss the next steps as we move forward. So the study area that we're talking and focusing today is the area of Wakefield and Bristol on the east side of the village, east of 25, north of Illinois 68. That star that you see is really the epicenter of where the flooding is the worst because it's kind of the low point in the watershed. All the water kind of just pools in there and has no place to go, which we'll talk a little bit more. So what you also see in the pictures and on the cover slide that was up there before I started the presentation, this is from the 2017, the July 2017 storm event. So as you can see from this picture that the roads were impassable. There was about 2.3 feet of flooding in the road. So emergency vehicles and just the motoring public can't get to where they want to get to. And from the modeling that we'll just present to you in the next few slides, this was about a 25-year storm event. So I'm sure you're aware of the different frequency of flooding, as you have heard, 10-year storm event or 100-year storm event. So this wasn't even a 100-year storm event. This was a 25-year event. So as we'll talk more that, obviously, as the intensity and the duration and as well as the flow for different storm events, the flooding can get worse. What you also see in this map is the general tributary area, which is kind of delineated by the blue line. So that's really how much residential subdivision area drains to that low spot. And then you do have some storm sewers, which is delineated in the yellow highlight here. So all these are existing storm sewer systems, and then they all flow to the east into the village of East Dundee. So that's important because as we'll talk about alternatives, what we can do, because that will be limited by how much impact you can have to the neighboring community. So obviously our intent was to have no impact at all as part of our alternative analysis. So our scope generally comprised of doing the study, which is what we are presenting today, and then present you the alternates for your consideration. And once you select an alternate, then we'll kind of take it to preliminary design. And then just to kind of look at it in more detail, as far as the utility impacts and so forth, and we'll fine-tune the construction costs and then present to you the 30% plans as we wrap up this project for at least this phase. So as far as when we do these studies, how do we go about it? Well, the first thing is we kind of try to look at and use readily available data. So for example, the Kane County GIS data, that is readily available. So that is helpful because we can get the aerials and the topo and everything readily available for our analysis. The village staff provided us the flooding pictures that you have seen. So they went out there during the 2017 flood event. That was very helpful in calibrating the model that we'll talk about. So we used that, and then the village provided us the utility data in the neighborhood. But as you would expect, that we supplement that data with our field survey. So we went out there, collected field survey on all the existing storm sewer systems, also obtained all the geotechnical soil borings because we kind of wanted to know the characteristics of the soil, and is there a potential to do something different with the flow if we can dissipate that into the ground. Also, we did a two-dimensional computer model. And I'll present a cool slide of that later on. But as you see the flood depths that we present, the two-dimensional model is necessary in a situation like this because we're not interested just in what's happening in the storm source. We're also interested in what's happening in the surface, in the road. So as the storm sewer is getting overwhelmed, where does the water want to go? What are the low points? Where is it overflowing and stuff like that? So that's why it's called two-dimensional, because you are looking under the ground and also above ground. So hence the nature of this computer model. Also, before we go into alternative analysis and looking at solutions, we want to make sure the computer model that we are using for solutions is really a good model, because it's always garbage in, garbage out type situation. So if we are not confident in the model, then any solutions we might present to you might not be also validated to provide you the relief that you're looking for. So we used the July 2017 event to calibrate our model for the existing conditions before we build the proposed conditions over it. And then, obviously, as we develop solutions, we look at a range of storm events from low storm events going down to 2-year or 10-year to all the way up to 100-year to kind of see that our solutions, what kind of level of protection would it provide. So that was kind of our general approach to looking at this. So let's kind of look at first what happens in existing conditions. So this is a 10-year. So this is a smaller storm event than the July 2017 storm event. Before I kind of present the inundation and what it means, there is a legend, and that's in your packet too, but what you see there on the left side in the legend is the different depths of flooding. So what we are trying to understand is that as we run this model through different storm events, how deep does the water get? So in this particular instance, you can see that it points about 1.5, 1.6 feet at that intersection. And that's represented by the legend too. And obviously you would expect that as we go into other storm events, so this is a 25-year storm event, the depth gets deeper. So this is about a 2.3 foot of flooding in the roadway at that low point. And obviously if you ran the same model to the 100-year, you can expect as much as 3 feet of flooding or over 3 feet of flooding. Now, there are residential structures around that low spot in the intersection. So what's important is that even though in the July 2017 storm event, it was a 25-year event and about 2.1 feet deep, it got closer to the structures, but none of the structures were flooded to the best of our knowledge. But obviously with major storm events or bigger storm events, you could potentially impact the structure. So we're just within a tenth or two of flooding the structures in a 100-year storm event. So that's really what is the 100 or the existing condition storm. So if you really stack all of them right next to each other, you can kind of see the flooding from 10-year to 100-year getting worse and deeper. So I talked about calibrating the model. So I just wanted to present this slide here. So again, based on the information provided by the village staff, they were out there, cleaning out the inlets and taking pictures of the flood. So on the left side of this, you see that blue line, which is representative of the flood levels that were documented by the village. And then on the right is our model. So when we ran the same storm through our computer models and simulated that, the simulation is as close as you can get. So you can see that the two matches pretty closely. And that's important when we do this work, is to really build that confidence in the model before we go any further. So if you want to summarize, well, what's happening? Why is this water ponding and not getting out? And what are the different things that could be done? So I'll go through some of the findings. So first of all, Wakefield and Bristol is just a low point in the watershed. Generally you have, roadways that kind of drains from point A to point B, and then you have the storm sewer taking the low storm events, and then there is overland flooding in the road, and eventually it goes into a creek or river or wherever it is headed. But when you have low points that has no overflows or anywhere for water to go, it is very natural that the water will just pond until it has a place to go or overland flow to somewhere else. Also, there is a large tributary area coming to this low point, which is about close to 100 acres. So that also does not help. And obviously, depending on which storm event you're looking at, you can experience about 1.5 to 3 feet of flooding. Number two is that, as you can see up on the north, right here, so this is Plymouth Circle. So it's by topography, about 100 acres is tributary. But to the north, there is an additional 47 acres. And that is supposed to drain by its own storm sewer system and flow out east through this storm sewer system and then come here. But what happens is that storm sewer isn't big enough, and also the inlets that are in the northern watershed aren't adequate enough to capture all that flow and put it in the storm sewer. So once the inlets are overwhelmed, the flow just goes along the road, And eventually, when it comes to this point, all that 47 acres, in addition to the 100 acres, also come down to this low point. So in reality, you have about 150 acres now coming to that low point.
Not to interrupt you, Ajay, so this is an inadequacy of the design of the storm sewer in that 47 acres impacting the Wakefield and Bristol area?
It is exacerbating the issue.
Thank you.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Also, well, okay, so normally you have all this flow coming down, and you would expect that to just be conveyed by the storm sewer system and go out into this pond into East Dundee. Well, that storm sewer along Wakefield, as well as primarily along Berkshire Circle, which is kind of the outlet for this whole system, that is not big enough. So, and it is not usual to design storm sewers to provide a 100-year capacity. Normally, you provide a 10 up to a 50-year storm in the storm sewer system, and the rest of it is supposed to overland flow. But because you really don't have any good place for that water to overland flow, either to the west or to the east, it just kind of sits there until there is more capacity in the storm sewer system. Also, you know, I kind of already pointed that out. The July 2017 storm was a 25-year event, and it was about 2.2 feet of flooding in the intersection. And again, more importantly, as you are kind of thinking ahead in terms of solutions, you really don't want to just design it for a 10-year or 25-year event. Obviously, you know, we can address any flooding if there is enough money, but you have to balance out the cost effectiveness of what really the village wants to achieve, what's a good level of protection. But, you know, the finding is that as you have more of these storm events, the flooding is going to get worse. So the basis of design, you know, we met with the village staff, we kind of brainstormed, okay, what do we want to design for? So our first cut was to say, you know what, we know what happened in July 2017, so let's see if we can at least get the relief from a similar type of flood in future. Can we have a system that does not create that kind of ponding? Can we reduce it? So that was, because it was a 25-year event, so our at least a starting point for the design was, let's design something for the 25-year event, and also then couple that with a design that if there was a 100-year event, then at least we don't impact any structure, so the water isn't getting into somebody's basement or somebody's home. Also, because downstream is East Dundee and their infrastructure, one of the important criteria was that no matter what we do, we either have to mitigate the impacts of our design so that we are not showing any negative impacts to the downstream. So that was another criteria. So we kind of looked at 10, 12 different options, and that's very natural, you know, just to kind of run through the system. And we also looked at a combination of different strategies that I'll talk about too, because normally you can put a pipe big enough and convey all that water, but you know, you're going to flood somebody else. You can store that water in the watershed somewhere where you have vacant land perhaps, and you can slowly release that into the system. Now, the advantage of that is now because you are storing that water, you can continue to use as much of your existing system rather than building a completely brand new system. And sometimes we are lucky enough that we can get some good underlying soils, and we can try to design a system that in addition to providing conveyance of the water and storing the water, we can also design it to infiltrate in the ground. So if that water just goes away, it never makes it into the system, well, that's less water that you have to worry about. So we kind of looked at a combination of 3 different strategies and came up with 3 different alternates that we're going to present today. So alternate 1 was to look at the opportunities of available vacant lands and what we can do with that. So as you saw in some of the previous flood pictures, and I'll just kind of go back to one of them here real quick. So this was a 100-year event. So as you can see, the water tends to not only pond in the intersection, but it also floods the vacant land to the west. Well, can we do something with that? Because it's kind of not ponding as much, because right now there is not enough infrastructure for the water to go from the intersection to the west. So it really ponds more in the intersection than it ponds in the vacant land. So, well, can we do something with that? So So that was one of the thoughts we had in developing alternate one. So as you can see, we're using these vacant lands both to the south and to the north of Bristol Lane, which is the village's right-of-way. And then also building a new storm system, because I don't know if you recognized, I mean, there is an area up at Wakefield and Kingston that floods too. So we were putting in a storm sewer system there and then rebuilding this storm sewer system with a larger pipe so that all that water along Wakefield can get down to the intersection, and then we can convey that to the storage area and store it there. And basically, in other words, all this water that is ponding in the intersection, we are taking that and moving that to where there is opportunity to store it. So the bullet points here kind of goes through. So we're looking at about 7 acre-feet of detention on this alternate one. And also there is some flooding up in this south area, so we're also proposing a 1.5 foot of detention up, just north of 68 and east of Wakefield. We'll talk more about detention as we open it up to questions. But one of the good things that we also discovered by doing the soil borings is that the underlying soils are really good for infiltration. So we are proposing in the storage area to go down to the sand seams and then allow that water to dissipate and infiltrate. So what that does is it kind of collects not only the water from the intersection into the storage ponds, but before it even makes it into the storm sewer system, it allows for it to infiltrate into the ground. And there are some really good soils about 10, 12 feet deep, so that's why our basin is about 7 to 8 feet deep, and then we'll dip down below that through other structures that will allow that infiltration to happen. Also, one other strategy that we looked at, back in 2005, H.R. Green with the village built a brand new system on Gulfview Lane. And that system eventually goes to this quarry pit to the west of Gulfview. And that system, if you were here, the Gulfview Lane used to flood even worse than what Wakefield and Bristol floods now. We have documented photographs where kids were walking to the school in knee-deep water, so that was really bad. And that system has been working wonderfully, I guess, from ever since it has been installed. So we actually came up with, and this was a staff suggestion as we kind of looked through the different brainstorming, to provide this storage, improve this storm sewer system, but when this storage is full and it can't store anymore, we provided a connection to that Gulfview Lane. So we're kind of trying to dissipate the water every which way possible, rather than letting the roads flood to some extent. So that is part of the strategy that we also modeled, and we got pretty good results that it allows some water to go to the west. And that is not a change in the drainage patterns, because when we looked at the existing conditions, some water does go to the west before it goes to the east. So we're trying to maintain existing conditions as much as possible. So this is generally the gist of alternative one. We are also proposing that pipe to be increased from what it is now to a larger pipe, and also to install the inlets as I talked about at Kingston. Alternate two is about the same in terms of detention storage, but what we wanted to look at here was, it's going to be expensive to build this brand new storm sewer system. So what would happen, what level of protection can we really achieve if we don't build that storm sewer system? Can we live without that? So this is just looking at the storage so that we can take all that water that ponds in the road and put it there and let the storm recede, and then you can slowly release that water. So will that be adequate enough? And what does it mean from a cost standpoint? How much would we save? We were, however, in this alternate, still proposing a storm sewer system and inlet to relieve the water from Kingston. As we go into alternate three, the only thing we didn't do in alternative three is really the bare bones, which is still providing the storage, but not doing anything at the Kingston and Wakefield. So these are the three alternates that we have vetted with the staff, and we felt that these were reasonable to provide the relief that you might be looking for without breaking the bank, so to speak.
The big differences in cost between 1 and 2 are upsizing the storm sewer on Wakefield?
Yes,
That's the biggest
yes, yes.
delta.
That's the delta. Because it's, again, Jared, my colleague Jared Oliver, he has been working on this project with all the modeling and everything, so I forgot to introduce Jared. But how long was the storm sewer along Wakefield, generally speaking? So 1,500 feet, you kind of plan for about, $300 to $400 a foot when you include the roadways, the replacement of the curbs, the 36-inch pipe. So that can be close to $800,000 for that storm sewer system.
So I'm sorry for jumping ahead.
Sure.
But what's very important to me is this a permanent solution? Is it a temporary solution? How many times will we be digging up that area? Because that is a lot of money for this to get fixed. And if it's not a permanent solution, I would rather us find a permanent solution than a Band-Aid to cover that, because the residents don't deserve a temporary solution with that type of money that is being spent. And then it also states partial road flooding. I need to understand what partial means. Is that
Yes.
3 feet, 4 feet? What's partial road flooding?
Correct. No, I'll get into that a little bit if you just allow me to go through some more slides. So again, and those are really good questions, because that really comes down to, first of all, any solution that we are providing is permanent to the extent that you have to be comfortable with the level of flooding that you will still experience. So there is no solution that will completely get rid of the water from this area, because it's just a low point. And short of building that storm sewer system along Berkshire and replacing that whole system down here, this white line. But the issue that comes into play is that when you replace that storm sewer system, not only does it become exorbitantly expensive, now you have to mitigate the impact somehow of passing that water onto East Dundee. Because that water that is currently being stored in the road is now going to get conveyed pretty suddenly to that pond that is not in this picture, but right there. So this pond here, now this pond is going to get filled up pretty soon, and now somebody is going to complain, hey, I never saw this water, now I see this water, and my water level in the pond is 3 feet high. Well, that's a negative impact. So we are trying to balance the potential liability with providing a relief with our design that you're comfortable with. And again, as I said, the basis of design was to relieve and reduce the extent of flooding rather than to get rid of the flooding in all storm events. And it is not unusual for a 100-year storm to pond in the road to some extent. You have to also realize that it does, flood, but because there is a system in place, it does recede pretty quickly too. So, can you live with, instead of 3 feet of ponding, with 1.5 feet of ponding, at which you can at least try to get your emergency vehicles through? That might be something you might want to think about. So that's kind of what we are really presenting here today. Yes.
You said in alternative number 3 that it did not address the Kingston issue? Is that what you said?
Yes. So,
Okay.
so again, that's why, the staff is recommending an alternate.
Okay, yeah.
That will address that.
I think our residents would like to see
Yes, no,
us
absolutely.
address
Again,
not
when
just
we,
the
when
one
we look
area.
at these alternates, we kind of present a whole host of different
Absolutely.
feasible options. And again, as you will see, it basically makes no sense to do alternate 3 because the costs are pretty much the same between 2 and 3. So why wouldn't you address, Kingston?
I think the concern about the water in the pond is not really a concern when the water's not ponding in the road, is
Correct.
as far as I'm concerned.
So which I'll get to. So I've presented all the 3 different options and what that, what the variation is. So now let's look at what happens if you implement alternate 1. So hopefully you can hear me if I'm facing that way. So in alternate 1, if you look at the 10-year, so and again, I may have to go back and forth a little bit. So just remember this picture, the 10-year, there is no water in the road. there is very minimal water in the road, about half a foot of flooding or half a foot of water. But compare this 25-year storm event to what happened in July 2017. Well, you see that there is no water in the road with our solution of alternative 1. Now, alternative 2 and 3 might look a little bit different, but at least I think we have made a huge improvement over existing conditions, regardless of which alternative you choose, because that storage, providing that storage to the west, is really taking all that water that used to pond in the street to kind of where you can manage it on vacant lands. So the 100-year is still, this is, getting into people's, backyards and front yards, and it's getting pretty close to structures, and which I say too close for comfort. But as you look at the solutions and the alternatives, the 100-year is getting improved, but not to the extent that I can say, there will be no flooding.
Just to help us conceptualize this a little bit better, could you elaborate on how much rain exactly in inches you modeled for the 10-year, the 25-year, and the 100-year alternatives? So
there are theoretical values that have been published by the Illinois State Water Survey. So a 100-year, for example, in this area is about 7.5 or 7.6 inches of rain.
Wow, that's a lot.
A 25-year, I'll have to look at it, but it's probably close to 5 inches of rain. A 10-year is close to about 4 inches of rain. So it is, a lot of rain. But what makes this worse is it's the flash flood. The rain happens in such a short time.
Yeah.
It is a flash flood type situation. It has no place to go, and it just ponds the street. But in the same token, as the rain recedes and that water goes away and it's not raining anymore, that flow then gets back in the storm sewer system, and then it dries up pretty quickly too. But from a damage standpoint, if you're going to flood and becomes deeper to the point that it's getting close to the structure, well, that water from the road can go out pretty quick, but the damage is already done. So that's what we are trying to avoid. So in this 10-year and the 25-year event, this intersection looks pretty good. Now, as you go up, depending on the storm event, you will see some curb line flow, which is normal, because what our model is doing is that it will report anytime the depth gets to a certain level, which is about 2 or 3 inches that we were modeling. So there is some water in the road, but it's again just flowing down the curb line. And then in the 100-year event, so again, what is important is, again, going back to this legend. So in the 10-year, the flow comes down, it floods this area or stores in this area, and the depth is about 3 to 4 feet in this pond. As we get into a higher storm event, like a 25-year event, now we are getting a little bit deeper into the pond. And then what we did was, the way it is designed is that if you get a 100-year storm event or close, then it'll start to overflow into this area to the north, which is the school property. So we'll talk about that. So and then as it ponds into these 2 vacant lots, or vacant properties, I should say, it also allows that water to kind of go west to Golfie Lane. And now this is alternative 1, so this is the Cadillac, I guess, of options. But if you look at option 2 or alternative 2, now you still see the same level of benefit at the intersection, which is really the focus area. So if you look at, it was 0 feet of ponding compared to existing conditions, or in this scenario, to about just a little over half a foot of ponding. Now remember, for the 25-year event, we were ponding about 2.2 feet. Now it is about, almost down to, 70% or 80% reduction. But the 100-year is still there. Existing conditions was 3.2 feet of ponding. Now you're down to 2 feet of ponding in alternative 2. And in alternative 3, again, a good amount of benefit in the 10-year and 25-year event. You can see, some water around in this intersection, so you will see some water, but it is not to the extent what you saw in the 2017 storm event. And the 100-year is the 100-year, so you're still storing water, you're still passing water to the west, but you still have some water in the road, and that is going to happen unless you replace the whole system along Berkshire, which is going to be cost prohibitive. We can talk more about that because that gets into a lot of adjacent community coordination, finding some other means to mitigate the impacts of putting that new storm sewer and so forth. So just a little quick snapshot of the different comparison of the depth. So you can see in existing conditions, you had anywhere from 1.6 feet of ponding in the intersection to about 3.1. Our maximum ponding is about 2 feet. Obviously 2 feet is still a lot of water, but it'll just go over the curb and stay in the parkway area generally by the sidewalk, but it still doesn't get anywhere close to what it would if you don't do anything. You will be looking at getting pretty close to the structures in that situation. And the good thing here is that, whether we look at alternative 1 or 2 or 3, the 50-year protection is about the same. And the 100 years protection is about the same compared to the existing. And then we kind of ran these alternatives through a series of questions. What does each alternative do as we look through it? So again, as I said, the basis of design was, does it provide the 10-year protection for the road? Each one of those alternatives will do that, which means that if there was a 10-year storm event, your system should function pretty good compared to existing conditions. Would it eliminate the curb line flow that you experience as you go up north along Wakefield? In the 10-year storm, it will, because we are putting in a brand new system going up north, and we are also adding new inlets. But in the alternative 2 and 3, there will be some curb line flow, which, as you drive along major roadways or local roads in a major storm event, you will see some water along the curb. Now, the thing to ask yourself is that, well, if it is ponding a little bit along both the curb lines, that you still have a travel lane open in the middle, is that good enough? That's a consideration that the board should have as you look through the different options. And then, does it reduces or eliminate structure flooding for up to a 100-year storm event? Well, the good news is that no matter which alternative you will pick, we're comfortable in making the statement that for up to a 100-year storm event, based on the modeling and the inundation that we have come up with, based on the calibration that we had already confirmed that it was a good model, you should have lesser chance for structural flooding than you would have in the existing conditions. Relief flooding at Wakefield and Kingston. So here is that yes versus the partial, and which I'll address what that partial means. So yes means that, yes, if we put in the storm sewer system up north and we put a brand new system along Wakefield, that should address relieving the Kingston area flooding. But if you don't do that, you go to alternative 2, because now we don't have that storm sewer system up north, we don't have a new storm sewer system along Wakefield. It will still reduce it, because by providing the additional storage, you are allowing that water to flow downhill pretty fast, but it's not fast enough that it will completely eliminate that flooding. So that's where that partial flooding comes into play. And I think you saw some of the inundation maps. And I think we might have, did we have the depths at Kingston, Jared? I don't remember. Okay, so they were not on the exhibit, right? Yeah, so we can provide you a comparison of the similar depths of flooding like we have done at the intersection for the Kingston area as well. And then, the construction costs for alternative 1, which Trustee Sullivan asked about the delta, yeah, it's about $1.8 to $2 million. We did use a 25% contingency because it's a concept study, it's a preliminary stage. So we kind of have a lot of unknowns, and which is why we will, as we go into a little bit more in-depth design, we'll fine-tune that number. But just to make sure that we can cover for some of the unknowns, we build a 25% contingency. Alternative 2 and 3 are generally about the same cost. So, you'll ask us, what would we recommend, but, we've worked with the staff, and I think the staff and us both concur that as we look at the next steps, alternative 2 is probably the most cost-effective when you compare the benefits versus the cost. And also the good thing with alternative 2, or even to some extent with alternate 1, is that, you can think of it as doing a staged or phased improvement. Let's do the storage and improve the area at Bristol and Wakefield. And, let's just see how the system performs and what level of flooding do you see along Wakefield and up in Kingston. Because if you really want to install that storm sewer system to have as good of a solution as you possibly can, given the solutions we have looked at, we will design the system up in this intersection so that if you do want to extend that, you will have the ability to do that in the future. If you want to do that right away, you have that option, but obviously the price tag is a little bit higher. So I'll let the staff add any more comments if you have, Kevin, Ed. Okay, well, so I think, in 10-year event, you have 1.6 feet of flooding at the intersection. And this is all ponding depths taken at Wakefield and Bristol. So in the 10-year event, you can see there is 0 feet of flooding at that intersection. In the 25-year event, which was your July 2017 storm event, you have a pretty significant reduction going from 2.3 feet to about 0.6 feet of flooding. That's a pretty good reduction. Given the fact that you're trying to also balance it with having no impacts downstream. The 50-year is a reduction of about 1.3 feet for all the different alternates. And 100-year 2-hour storm or 100-year storm event, you're going from 3.1 feet to about 2 feet.
Sorry, Kevin, so your point is regardless of which option, you don't essentially change the ponding depth? So regardless of how much money we spend, we're not going to effectively change?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So option 1 is 1.8 to $2 million. Option 2 and 3, go back to that same slide, Ajay. Option 2 and 3, it's only $1 million, but all 3 options, you see the same benefit. That's why we're recommending option 2, which also relieves the flooding up on Kingston. So that's
Okay, but the
staff's
one thing
recommendation.
that my question is with alternative 2 and 3, it's saying partial for alternative 2, and for alternative 3, it's saying no. So with,
That's the flooding along Wakefield, so that's the water you see coming down the curb lines, coming down Wakefield. So for an extra $1 million, you could reduce the curb line flooding down Wakefield, down to the actual Bristol and Wakefield.
then why wouldn't alternative 3 be cheaper? I'm just trying to figure out why, with the 2 alternatives, we have partial and no, and the price tag is the same. So I'm kind of curious as to why that
Because
is.
the storm sewer at Kingston is so minute, it may only be $50,000 to do that additional storm sewer in option 2.
And
So
then where's the additional, I see the little star here, costs related to final design and property acquisition easements not included in cost estimates. So with that, like this isn't the final cost, how much more are we adding to that total?
That's where we don't know. The property, the village does not own the property south of the school. We don't own the school property, so we'd have to do basically an IGA with the school district to allow us to use their property and go into land acquisition to try to acquire. It's 3 parcels south of the school. The parcel all the way to the south along 62 in Wakefield by Morningside, the village actually owns that parcel. So that's the only parcel that I think I want to say it's actually might be 2
Is
parcels.
any of that vacant land in private hands, or is it all in government entities?
The 3 parcels south of the school are privately owned.
So it's not all school board, it's
Correct.
some are private.
Correct.
That could get interesting.
Yeah, but, and those costs don't change based on what option either, you know, so it's relative.
The cost
So-
of improvement.
So Ajay, I'm sorry, I'm looking at this, I guess I'm lost on this. You're gonna, option one, you're gonna put in a massive storm sewer, but it doesn't effectively change the ponding depth, right? So help the dumb guy out here to appreciate
Yeah,
why
that's
that
a really good
monster
question.
storm sewer wouldn't change the ponding depth. I would think that'd be like draining the bathtub.
Yeah, so the reason we were putting in alternative one, this storm sewer system, was to get rid of this curb line flow.
Right.
Think about it, yes, you put this brand-new storm sewer system. Oh, thank you. So you put this brand-new system here, but everything is limited by this storm sewer system going out. So unless and until you replace this storm sewer system, you can put this big pipe here, and you can get rid of this blue spot here, but the reason this ponding depth does not change, because you are limited by the capacity of this water going out.
Okay, so it wouldn't all go to that vacant property on the left.
Yeah,
Some of it would have to go to the pond that's at the end of the storm sewer you're considering enlarging to the right. Is that correct?
say that again, Trustee Sullivan?
So you would put in a larger storm sewer, a larger diameter storm sewer along Wakefield,
Correct?
and that goes to some pond that's to the right, correct? There's a pond to the
No,
right?
no, there is no pond to the right.
Thought there
That,
was,
that is just the roadways.
I thought there was a pond down here somewhere that this goes.
East Dundee.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay,
So
so,
that's one that there'd be a conversation with somebody there, right? That pond you mentioned would fill up deeper than it did before. We'd have to have a conversation with somebody over there.
yes.
Right?
Yeah, this pond. And
Right.
this is a, privately owned pond, and
Right?
in
It'd
the
be a
villages.
much bigger diameter.
Yes.
So,
Yes,
so these
so-
are all unknowns.
Yeah, we did look at that option. I mean, we did size this to see how much bigger the pipe needs to be on Berkshire to get all the flow out. So, I mean, yes, we can present you some data on that too.
Yeah.
But the challenge is gonna be, okay, what do you do further east when you look at the impacts as to what that pond is?
I mean,
And-
let me just sit here again. My first thought is, I get that it's more money, but if it would solve the problem, I'd be willing to sit here and say, hey, let's try and find a way to come up with the money to solve the problem, because as Trustee Lawrence said to me, an improvement is one thing, but a solution is a dimensionally better thing. So we'd be
Yeah,
interested.
and the problem is, we keep putting Band-Aids on things, and it's costing us more and more money. As a trustee and as a resident, I'm tired of the Band-Aids.
But as
I'm
Mr.
tired of
Absolutely, yeah.
paying $1 million to put a Band-Aid on, and then all of a sudden, something breaks, and now it's another $1 million.
But as Kevin Gray just said, if I'm only going to go from, a depth of 2.0 to 2.0 for, another $1 million, what am I spending another $1 million for, right?
Correct.
So I was going to ask Bob, why do we pick option 2, but now I get it, It's $1 million less for roughly the same thing-ish.
Exactly.
It's complicated, right? It's complicated. If it was easy, you'd just know which one to go with.
Now, one of the things that, has, or should work in our favor, and we have accounted for some of it, but we also did not want it to be overly aggressive in our design, that the soil types that we have encountered are really good. And based on what we did on Gulfview, we have had several major storm events, and we have had no flooding because of the infiltration trench that we dug out there. So we are still going to do that here. So we're expecting the relief of water in the ground infiltrating to be more than what we are estimating in our design. But again, that's where we kind of make an engineering judgment to not overly estimate, what that can provide. So these are probably conservative estimates of the depth of ponding, but I will not stand here and say that, yes, if you chose alternative 2, that you will have 0 feet of flooding in the roads at all storm events. 10 and 25 and 50 storm events are generally what you experience more frequently. 100-year storms are becoming frequent enough too. And obviously, as you pointed out, looking at, I mean, we started out with hoping that we will have a solution that can address flooding all the way up to a 100-year event.
Tell you what would be embarrassing is to authorize monies as a board, and then after authorizing monies and having a project, having the streets still flood, and people say,
Correct.
all that money was spent and we still got flooded.
Correct.
Even if it's moderately flooded, flooding would be,
We need a permanent
we
solution.
need something that'll almost all of the time work. Granted, a 100-year event, no solution will solve. But virtually all of the time is what we're shooting for here, right? Because there is politics involved. We can't look foolish.
Correct. This can't keep happening. And if we have the risk of people's basements still flooding, and we have the risk of people still complaining about it, that to me is not a permanent solution. And as a resident in that neighborhood, I would be beyond pissed that the village spent that kind of money.
I think there's the political will to do the right thing to fix it.
Yes.
But we need to have something that'll
Correct.
virtually always work. By the way, has this always been the case at that intersection? Has this historically done this forever?
I think it does have a long-term history of flooding, but it seems to me that in the last 5 years, that these rain events are a little bit more severe. We're getting a lot more rain in a short period of time, and that's just complicating the issue.
So, chalk another one up to climate change, I guess, right? So that's the variable, right? That's what we figure has changed.
I mean, the
So-
rainfalls have become more intense and larger in volumes, that's for sure.
I don't think I'm misreading it, am I? I mean, I think we would do the right thing if we knew, if we knew
I
what
would
to
agree
do.
with that. My question is, the asterisk is how much we got into it right now?
We haven't had any discussions.
Roughly.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm just wondering how much we have into it right now with that asterisk being there.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Yes, something like that, yes, yes.
Which we would have had to pass that anyway, right? I mean, before, yeah. Mhm. So about 120. Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Ajay, when you went through your alternatives, did you determine the no-depth 100-year solution? And do you have an estimate of what that would be then?
One thing we did not look at in detail is that area to the north, that 47 acres that I talked about, that also comes down, is what level of improvement. We did talk with the staff about, can we improve that area to the north and add more inlets and storm sewer up to the north watershed so that that flow does not come down to Bristol and Wakefield. That is something we can extend our analysis more. But the issue also still kind of remains that this area, before it can go overland flow to the east or to the west, it just is deep enough and low enough that it will have some level of ponding unless and until you replace the storm sewer system going to the east into this pond in East Dundee. Now, we can model that, tell you what that pipe is going to be, because we have that information, and we can, if you would direct us and the staff to go talk to the village and see what they're willing to allow the village to do to come up with even a solution that has no depth of flooding for all storm events, we can definitely look at that.
You don't have that information now, so.
I don't have that right now.
I'm sure that's
So I guess we'll regroup and hear a total solution, whether it involves that 47 acres overland flow to the north and then going to the east. So
Yeah,
I'd be
we'll
happy
take a
with
look
that.
at it.
yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, those are two things we can look at. But I do know that, and Jared, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that, do you remember right off the bat how much the depth reduced down to if you were to replace the storm sewer on Berkshire?
I don't remember the depth for sure. We modeled 48, and we got a reduction. I think we kind of, because we didn't want to negatively impact East Dundee, we kind of didn't chase that all the way to.
Yeah, and then also, also one thing to know And we'll definitely look at that and come back to you. Because this is a low point, I mean, the topography does go up high as you go east, and then the storm sewer will become even more deeper, as you try to kind of look at options to replace that.
We have to look at it, though.
Yes.
What I'm hearing is that we don't know what the solution is that would get us to normal rainfall events and no flooding in the intersection. So until we take a further look at that, I think the board's a little hesitant to move.
Yeah, and just to make sure I understand, when you say normal flood events.
We'll talk about it.
Okay, sounds good. Okay.
We'll bring something back, I think.
Sure.
I think our ultimate goal is no flooding, but,
You gotta know
yeah,
the cost.
sure.
Right.
We need to know the cost, absolutely.
So
but
yeah, no flooding up
I
to
know.
100-year storm. is the
Absolutely.
solution you're looking
Our
for.
residents deserve that.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Aji.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Right.
Okay. Moving on. Any old business, Kelly? You're done, right? Thank God.
There's
No
no old
business.
business.
I guess so.
Any new business?
We do have one.
We do have, we actually going to have two. A resolution approving the authorization of execution of insurance broker services agreement.
I'll motion.
We have a motion
I'll second.
and a second. Motion, trustee Rayberg, second, trustee Lawrence. Roll call, please.
Trustee O'Sullivan.
Yes?
Trustee Rayberg.
Yes.
Trustee Frost.
Yes.
Trustee Lawrence.
Yes.
President Skillman.
Yes. Motion, resolution is approved. I'm looking for a motion to consider removing item 8 from the consent agenda earlier in tonight.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the motion at this point is just to remove it from consideration at tonight's meeting.
I motion to remove section 8 from the meeting.
8D, yeah.
8D.
8D.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion, trustee Lawrence, second, trustee Frost. Roll call, please.
Trustee Rayberg.
Yes.
Trustee Frost.
Yes.
Trustee Lawrence.
Yes.
Trustee O'Sullivan.
Yes.
President Skillman.
Yes. Okay, motion carries. Trustee reports. Trustee Lawrence, why don't you go first?
Real quickly, I wanted to thank 103.9, the Fox, our first responders, our public works, our village manager, Mark Huber, IT, and anyone that I might have forgotten about. Our very first Burger Fest exceeded the goal of 500 to 700 people we had planned. And we actually had in attendance 5,000 attendees that traveled as far as Chicago. We did have a few flaws with the Burger Fest, but we knew about it. We certainly did not expect to have 5,000 people show up. But we've gone ahead. We've taken those flaws. We plan on making improvements. And if 103.9 The Fox would like to utilize us again next year, we'd be honored to. Also, the events committee is looking for residents to join our committee. We're looking for residents from the east side, the west side, Kimball Hill, Winchester Glen, anyone that has an interest, and if they could please email S as in Sam Miller, MILLER @cville.org. And that is all I have.
Thank you, trustee Lawrence. Trustee O'Sullivan.
Just echo trustee Lawrence's sentiments. That was awesome work by all the village departments. Great job to everybody. Thanks very much. That's it.
Trustee Rayberg.
Same. Echo. Thank you. Thank you.
And trustee Frost.
Jumping on board with that Burger Fest thing with trustee Lawrence. It was awesome. It was a great turnout, a lot of fun. Thanks to all the volunteers, all the vendors. And I wouldn't even start to mention names. Both fish pantries did well. Thanks for everybody bringing out items for our fish and the District 300 fish. A couple other things I had. As far as the lawns around the village of Carpentersville, I see some that aren't mowed. Try to keep your lawns up. Again, with the garbage cans, keep them 2 feet apart. I see some mold on houses. I don't know if that's an issue on my house. I mean, I have some issues too.
Wet and forget at Costco.
Yeah, yeah, so.
Gets rid of it for 5 years.
Yeah, so she's got what is it?
Wet and forget. They sell it at Costco. You get 2-gallon jugs for $29.99.
There we go. We'll try something like that, but I know it's a hassle. It is a hassle, but also picking up after your dogs. I see a lot of people doing it. I see a lot of people out in the park, out in the Carpentersville Park, a lot of people utilizing it. Try to pick up after your dogs in the parks, by the schools. Also, once again, thanks to the PD and the fire department for all they do. There are a lot of things that are behind the scenes. And one other thing about the Burger Fest, I don't think there was any issues, not that I heard of. Things went well, so we look forward to next year with 103.9. I talked with them after the fest the other day, and they were all on board for another one. And this weekend, Rock the Fox with the Oddfellows. So that's all weekend long out at Carpenter Park. So come on out and enjoy. We got a carnival and all kinds of other things. So hopefully, it's supposed to be a nice weekend. So enjoy.
Thank you, Trustee Frost. I'll echo most all of that. First of all, I got to do a shout out to Home Depot for our $20,000 grant. Ended up being a lot of work by our own public works guys, so thanks, guys. Yeah, we were all down there, and I watched the guys finish up the stage. We were pushing it there at the end, but we got it done. They got it done. But thank you to Home Depot. Jerry from Otto actually helped us get that grant from them. Also, we're getting ready to, in a couple weeks, we're going to meet and go over the Burger Fest and review that. And we made some mistakes, and we'll learn from them, and we'll do better next year. Like Trustee Frost said, Rock the Fox this weekend. It's already set up down there. The carnival. Actually, I just heard them on the radio tonight on my way here. They were on the radio doing a little commercial, so that was nice. We're getting a lot of excellent, press, you guys. I mean, awesome, and people are starting to, really notice, and they're happy stuff's going on in the park again. So, a lot of work by Public Works, though. A lot of work. So we need to circle the wagons on that and figure out. I don't know if there's another way of doing it any quicker or better, or more whatever efficient. But I know it's just a lot of work for all of us, for all you guys. The guys that were there Saturday night, a lot of the staff members were there. I don't know if all the trustees made it or not, but I know some were out of town. But it was a good time. Very proud to be there, and the employees that were there working were actually smiling. I mean, they were happy. They were happy. It
And
was
a
great
few
fest.
residents chipped in as well.
Residents,
Yeah,
but the employees were like, "This is great. We haven't had something like this since we worked here, and this is what we want to be involved with as employees to the village." So it was nice to hear those compliments.
I got a little nervous when they ran out of beer, John.
They ran out of beer, but they got more beer.
Yes.
And meat.
Yes.
It was nuts.
It's a learning curve. There's no doubt.
Talked to Meat and
First year.
Potato yesterday afternoon. I had a meeting with him, and he was bringing food in from McHenry, his store there, and from Carpentersville. 2 stores delivering food.
Once again, for our first event, they weren't planning on 5,000 people.
Oh, it was a great event. Let's support this weekend. They're going to have a great event. They're excited. Maybe next year we'll all work together and try to make one event so Public Works guys could be happy with us. But also tonight is Katrina's last meeting tonight, so we want to say thank you. The credit card thing happened. I'm so happy. It's been like a year in the works. So we got credit. We can take credit cards here now, so everybody knows that. Please pass it on so people aren't afraid to come here, and pay their bills. So, all right. Anything else? Anybody? Do we have no closed session? Motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
I second.
We have a motion by Trustee Frost, a second by Trustee Lawrence.
Voice vote.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, meeting adjourned.